Chapter 2 Master Goldman's Soiree. Curse the Corellian Emperor to all the fire pits of the afterlife. Asam seethed and tore the parchment he held in tiny pieces. Why does he hound my life so? Asam's 4 advisors, 2 minor noblemen, the master of the guilds of Caron and the chamberlain of Asam's household, stood diplomatically silent. 1,385,000 gold pieces was the reason the Corellian Emperor so hounded Asam. To be precise, 1,385 gold pieces that Asam owed the Emperor. Jannemeyer Goldman, the master of the guilds, dropped his gaze to the thick-fingered hands folded politely before him. He'd advised Asam not to take out such a massive loan with the Emperor, but Asam had needed the money badly, and the Emperor had been willing to lend. Now he wanted it back. And what if Asam could not pay? And Goldman knew Asam could not pay. What then? What might the Emperor demand as recompense? Goldman shuddered to think. The Corellians would not invade, never that. But they certainly might lay claim to some lands, or, gods forbid, to Caron itself. Would that make Star-Sun Salem finally take a more personal hand in the West's affairs? Salem, although concerned about Asam's increasing debt, had thus far preferred to see if Asam could not solve his problems himself. But Goldman knew that Salem would never stand by and allow the Corellians to assume control of even the most barren of fields in Tensendor. "Well, there's nothing for it," Asam said in a milder tone of voice, "but to pay the damned man." Goldman raised his eyes in surprise, as did the other 3 advisors. "Pay? How?" Asam took a very deep breath and sat back in his chair, staring at the 4 men ranged before his desk. All the gods in the universe knew he hated to do this, but not only would it solve most of his financial problems, it would also stop the flow of his people north. And perhaps wipe the smirk off Zared's face. "Gentlemen," Asam said softly, "I have no option. From 5th day next week, the taxes on goods moving up and down the Nordra as goods moving along the inland roads in the west will be raised to 1/3 of the total value of the goods so moved." Goldman could not believe he'd heard right. 1/3? 1/3 tax on all goods moved would cripple most merchants and traders, but it would destroy any peasant bringing the meager bag of grain to the market. And what of the man who thought to take a basket of eggs to his widowed mother in the next village? Would that also be taxed 1/3? He opened his mouth to object, but Asam forestalled him. "Gentlemen, I know this is an onerous burden for the Western Tensendorians to bear, but it should last only a year, perhaps 2. A year or 2 would be enough to drive most to starvation, Goldman thought, on top of the taxes they already had to pay. And, Asam continued, think of the rewards we will reap from those. He hesitated slightly. Others who move their goods through our territory. For years they have taken advantage of our roads and riverboats to move their goods to market, whether here in Caron or farther south to the Corellias. It is high time they paid for the maintenance of the roads and boats they use." And by others, Goldman and his 3 companions knew precisely whom Asam meant. Zared. Zared, who moved the wealth of his grain and gems and furs along the Nordra down to the markets that made him and his people prosperous. "Sir Prince," Goldman said, "this is indeed a weighty tax." "If I might advise against it, I have made up my mind, Goldman," Asam said. "I called you here as the Chamberlain Roskick and Barons Jessup and Baron not to ask for your advice, but to inform you of the measures that must be taken." Roskick exchanged a glance with Goldman, then spoke very carefully. "Sir Prince, perhaps it might be best if you talked this over with Star-Sun Salem." "I will inform Salem of my decision, Roskick." The Chamberlain subsided. He had already said too much, considering that his very position relied on Asam's goodwill, Goldman, however, had no such qualms. "These taxes are so grievous, Sir Prince, that perhaps they should be discussed with Starman Axis Sunsor himself gave my father the right to tax the West as he willed, Master Goldman. I will inform Star Sun Salem, but I have every right to impose these taxes without his assent. Is that understood?" The four bowed their heads. Ascom looked at them a moment, then resumed. "There is one more thing. Over the past 18 months, if not more, over 2,000 men have moved their families north of the Azel." Ascom shrugged a little. "If they want to subject their families to the northern winters, then so be it. But the fact remains that most of those 2,000 have been men skilled in their crafts, professional businessmen, or successful farmers. They have left a considerable gap in the West's resources. No wonder I have so much trouble trying to meet debt repayments." No, Goldman pleaded silently. "Don't do it. Don't. In order to stem the tide, I have instructed the border guards of the Azel and Jervois Landing to exact the equivalent of 10,000 gold pieces from each family that intends to leave for the north." "But that is 10 times my annual income," Goldman thought. "How will an ordinary craftsman pay it?" "That should go some way toward balancing the loss of their skills," Ascom said. "That is all, gentlemen. You have my permission to leave." That evening, Goldman called more than a score of men to his townhouse in Upper Caron, all of them leading citizens and tradesmen, and there he spoke volubly about the new taxes and their implications. "I will be ruined," cried Nethiram Pumpster, master bellmaker. "How else can I transport my bells if not by riverboat?" "And I," cried Carl Hurst, one of the leading wool traders in Tensendor, "as will most of the peasants in the West. All rely on transporting their wool bales across the roadways of the West to the Akari markets in the Minaret Peaks." His voice was joined by a dozen others, all increasingly angry and indignant as the implications of the tax sank in. "As will everyone eventually be ruined," Goldman said, quietly into the hubbub. He held up his hands. "Gentlemen, please!" Men slowly subsided into their seats, worry replacing anger. "I should have moved north last year when my brother went," Hurst said as he sat down. "The north may be farther from the markets than I'd like, but at least Zared wouldn't try to take my soul to put meat on his table." "More like," put in a stout silversmith, "he'd give his soul if he thought it might put meat on your table." Goldman nodded to himself, pleased with the direction the conversation had taken, content now to sit back and let the treason take its course. Treason, he asked himself? Nay, natural justice more like. "Things have never been the same since Priam died," said a fine metalworker. "Not the same since Axis Sunsor proclaimed Tensendor and the shores of our lake," said another. Now, Goldman demurred. "The Sunsors have done us proud. Have you ever known life to be better, more peaceful? Who dislikes trading with the beauty-loving and generous-spirited Akari, or even the Avar?" There was a small silence. Then Hurst spoke up again. "Our quarrel is not with Tensendor as much, nor with the Akari or the Avar. I, for one, admire the Sunsors greatly for what they have done for our land." "Oh, aye," a dozen voices echoed fervently. "Aye," Hurst repeated. "I voice no wish to resurrect the hatreds of the past." "Nay," came the resounding cry. "Nay," Hurst echoed again, then looked about and licked his lips. "But these taxes, I cannot believe them. It never would have happened under King Priam, or even King Carel. From what I have heard of the man, Ascom will destroy the West in his attempts to solve his debts." No one missed the emphasis. "Of course, Ascom was not bred for such responsibility," said a merchant named Branson Heverand. He was one of Goldman's closest friends, and he knew the way the master of the guild's mind was traveling. "He has not the blood for it. No wonder he missteps so badly." Yet his father, Belial, base-born as he was a kind and effective prince, Goldman said, working as closely with Heverand as two voices in a duet. and he was Axis Sunsor's right-hand man. Surely he deserved the reward of princedom of the West. Ascom is not the man his father was, Heverin said. Unlike Belial, he's lived a life of ease. He's not had to fight for his life, nor the life of his country. He's not been tempered by the sacrifice and loss Belial endured. Nor has he inherited his father's courage and fairness. Men nodded about the room. Given an estate to run, no doubt he would prove capable enough, Heverin finished. But so large a responsibility as the princedom of the West has Ascom flummoxed. And us bankrupt, someone muttered, and the room broke into subdued laughter. Yet the North prospers, Goldman said. Zared and his parents before him has built steadily on solid foundations. He is generous but firm, courageous but conservative in the risks he takes, or exposes his people to. His people love him. Many among our people love him too, said one of the men. And there's the nub of the matter, said Heverin, speaking only at the slight nod of Goldman's head. Zared was born of the blood of kings, Ascom was not. Thus the North prospers while the West struggles. Silence. Born of the blood of kings, said a voice back in a darkened corner. Are you saying what I think you say? Zared was born to rule? What I say is only fact, Heverin replied. Zared is born of Rivka, the last princess of Akar, and Magariz, one of the highest-ranking nobles Akar had ever seen. They were legally married. Bornheld, Rivka's eldest, was illegitimate, and thus his attempts to claim the throne of Akar met with disaster. Axis, may he live forever, was also illegitimate, and while he founded the throne of the stars, he rightly made no claim to the Akarite throne. Zared was Rivka's only legitimate child. Zared, he paused, reluctant to speak the words, even among friends, before finally gathering his courage, is the legitimate heir to the throne of Akar. But Akar no longer exists, Goldman put in. The throne no longer exists. Axis destroyed both. Surely Zared is heir to nothing but memories. There was a moment of silence, then Hurst spoke in. His face red. But is that right? The Akari have their Talon, the Ravensbund have their chief, and now the Avar even have their head, the Mage King Israel. Why should the Akarites not have their head, nay, their pride back? The room broke into uproar, and Goldman was once again forced to stand up and hold his hands for quiet. May I remind you, my friends, he said very softly, that the term Akarites is no longer lawful. One of Salem's first edicts on taking the throne of the stars had been to ban the use of the term Akarites from the human population of Tensendor. To him, it smacked too much of the hatreds that had torn Tensendor apart in the first instance. Whether we are Akarites or Tensendorians or bloody Manmalians, the silversmith said angrily, doesn't change the fact that I'd prefer to have a king, Zared, ruling my life than a petty prince Ascom. No, wait, there's more. It doesn't change the fact that whether prince or king or pauper, for all I care, Zared is the man I'd prefer to have at my back in a street brawl, in a war, or as a drinking companion in a tavern. I respect Zared. I like Zared, and what I think of Ascom doesn't bear spoken words in this company. And what's more, cried a voice, Zared is the rightful ruler, not Ascom. Gentlemen, gentlemen, Goldman cried, please listen to me. Quiet down now. Yes, thank you, that's better, gentlemen. I am master of the guilds of Carlon. I am your spokesman, your voice. What would you have me do? Silence. I think, Heverin said quietly, that a little visit to Zared might be in order. I think the prince needs to know just how his people, no one in the room missed the use of the phrase his people, feel about a number of issues. Will he act, said a voice, or will he back away? If it is your wish, Goldman said, then I, with Heverin, will make my way north. On a trading trip, should Ascom inquire. Once with Zared, I am sure I can phrase matters in such a way that Zared will be hard put not to act." He regarded the room silently, then grinned conspiratorially.